live button. Wow, and it's right at 9. Creepy.
That is weird. And why do I not see the stream? Oh, there it is. I see it. Let me hit the mute button. There we go. Block that. There we go. Oh, cool. Everybody's in. Okay, cool. Okay, got Glenn right there. Michael over there. Yeah, this might work. So are you going to flip people upside down, Jonathan?
No, I am not.
Oh, don't move the whole background now. See, I can't talk while you're moving everybody around. It's just too distracting.
For those that aren't aware, my avatar internally at Puppet is me upside down because I'm in Australia.
Brilliant.
Okay. Makes sense. So, where in Australia are you?
Perth, West Coast.
Okay. So, if we were playing a game of a totally hypothetical game of Pandemic right now, how would your little island be doing?
East Coast, not so great. West Coast is okay. Matter of time.
Yes, same here. But you know what? Let's not talk about that. I just realized most of my meetings for the past, all this week have started out this way.
Exactly.
So let's just buck the trend.
None of us is dead. We're not in the hospital.
We're all here. Actually, we're the ones.
We're all sheltering in place.
To working at home and talking on Skype already.
Yeah, I thought it was so funny. All the Microsoft people that were like, working at home was like a new concept to them. I'm like, really?
What? Really?
You've got to be kidding me.
Okay, that's weird. So I know they do have those. They still have the nice offices there. Everybody has like an office with a door, relatively speaking, something like that.
Yeah, that's kind of amazing.
I think that age is over.
I
think they moved to open offices recently.
Oh no!
At least the PowerShell team did. Yeah, I think.
So, Michael, where are you based?
I'm out of St. Louis. Well, I'm on the Illinois side of the river, but if I say that, people assume Chicago. So, St. Louis.
Like East St. Louis? I hope not.
A little bit further. Not too much. I'm out in Belleville.
Oh, okay. I had relatives in O'Fallon, so I'm very familiar with that area. I grew up in Springfield.
Yep, lived there too.
So,
you lived in Springfield?
O'Fallon.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
You guys ready to get rolling?
Yep.
Sure.
All right. So let me see here. So we don't do the podcast weekly. So the old habits they're a little rusty.
The muscle memory is not as strong.
2 guests. Okay, starting. Okay, cool. Tonight on the PowerScripting podcast, we are pleased to welcome. We have 2 guests tonight: Michael Lombardi and Glenn Sarti. Welcome, guys.
Thank you.
So I don't know. Have either of you been on the podcast before? I don't recall because I missed a couple, Jonathan.
Yes, but travel was not a thing this week, so we're glad you could be here with us.
Well, I'm also glad that I could be here with you. So, Michael, you want to introduce us to? You have a resident over your left shoulder there.
Yeah, that's Godiva. That's my spouse's service dog. And then also running around somewhere in the room is Bella, a Chihuahua Dachshund.
Awesome. So, Michael, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I'm a software engineer at Puppet. I was actually picked up for Puppet by Glenn at a PowerShell summit. We met, had a couple beers, chatted a bunch, talked a lot about configuration management and documentation and kind of how things were going and changing in the industry. And then a couple months later, he's like, hey, you should apply for this. And I was like, I'm too stupid. He's like, you should apply for this. And fast forward, and I ended up working at Puppet, which meant mostly writing a bunch of content to manage Windows servers via Ruby, which has been an experience.
Did you know Ruby before going in?
No, I was actually, in retrospect, I got hired into an incredible team who care more about your ability to learn and what you're like as a teammate and your ability to do lateral thinking and what I think of now as meta skills. So they were looking for those things. There was like a 3.5-hour interview with the whole team, which was grueling and terrifying. But at the end of it, they're like, cool, we'll hire you. You don't write any Ruby, but you can learn to write Ruby because the things that we need from you are, do you understand running Windows systems in anger, and can you think around problems? So
I want to.
That's a smart way to hire people.
Bit. Yeah. So running Windows systems in anger. What is that? Well, before you answer that, actually, let's go over to Glenn and talk to him for a second. Hey, Glenn.
Hello.
Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So I come from an operations background. So I used to work for a bank doing desktop client infrastructure. And then one day, Rob Reynolds of Chocolatey fame put out a tweet saying, hey, want to come work with me at Puppet? So I put in my resume on Easter Friday, went to the pub. By Easter Monday, I had a phone call from Puppet Labs saying, hey, we'd really like to chat with you about coming to work for us. 9 months later, I signed my job to go over to Puppet while I was in Walt Disney World, flew back to Australia. 2 months later, packed up the family, moved to America for 2 years in Portland, Oregon. So worked for Puppet for 2 years. Originally came in on the Windows team. So that was with Rob Reynolds, Ethan Brown, who's also done some work in the PowerShell community. And then 2 years later, moved back to Perth, but still working for Puppet. I'm now on the Puppet Developer Experience team. So I'm a primary developer on the Puppet Development Kit. So trying to make people more successful with Puppet. And I use Windows day in, day out. So I feel all the Windows pain with cross-platform tools and things like that. So just trying to make our Windows users life much nicer.
That's awesome. So that's pretty cool that you moved here, first of all, but then you were able to move back and stay with the same company. So does Puppet have much going on there in Perth?
In Perth, no. They had to create an entire office in the HR system just for me. Most of the offices in Sydney and Melbourne, so East Coast.
Yeah, so a buddy of mine was the first employee from, I think it was New Zealand. So Splunk had to create a New Zealand legal entity to hire a friend of mine at the time because he's the first, New Zealand employee. Well, that's cool. So you don't see your teammates in person very much then? Well, some of them are in Sydney, and do you still work, with the global team as well? Yeah.
So my team, which used to include Michael, used to be Belfast, London, me in Perth, Portland, St. Louis, and New Jersey. So the entire globe.
Gotcha.
So time zones are a thing.
So what time do you try to work?
I normally work 9 to 5. I take Wednesday mornings for West Coast US, and Thursday evenings is East Coast US time.
Gotcha. Well, that's kind of cool. So going back to that comment, Michael, about using Windows systems in anger or administering them in anger, tell me what that kind of line of thinking was about.
Yeah, so one of the things that my team was really big about was we'd hired a couple of incredibly sharp developers, right? And so we had a lot of really powerful development chops on the team. And Glenn brought a lot of operations expertise himself. But when they were looking to add, they're like, well, we're still pretty dev heavy. We want to add somebody who has some ops experience. And so I came up mostly doing tier 2, tier 3 sysadmin work, almost entirely Windows. And so I think that kind of helped out a lot. I'll never forget, everybody's got that story, right, where like you took down production. And so the first time I did that, I was so proud of myself. I had written a patching script which very cleverly would just scrape all of the released MSUs, extract them into cabs, push them over the wire, apply all of them, and then reboot, and then apply all of them until none of them applied anymore. It was very bad. It worked, but it was
Anybody on
very
the phone
bad.
understand what might be wrong with that logic?
It was functional.
But what if one couldn't apply?
Oh, you just keep going through the next set. You just go continually through them, and then
reboot.
You're good to go. Yeah, absolutely.
Reboot.
It was terrible, but it did work for a while. And so what happened is I was supposed to be doing the alternate site, and I kicked it off. And because I'm very smart, the default node set that it would apply to was production. Because I'm very smart. Actually, it was all, but production is first in the list. And so I was looking at the names, and I was like, "Let's say prod app." It didn't say prod app. Did that say prod app 2? Oh shit! And the next thing that went down was the control server, which I was running the script from. And so luckily, I only took down the app servers and not all the Oracle databases, which would have been great.
So along comes Puppet and configuration management, and now you're kind of in a world where I'm hoping that you're trying to bring some order to what might have been some unstructured madness previously. How's that been working out?
Well, I don't own any infrastructure anymore, so great for me. I like to think that Glenn and James and myself and Bill and everybody else, Ethan, were pretty successful in giving everybody else the tools to make their configuration baselines a little bit simpler, a little bit more reliable and repeatable.
So I don't know, Jonathan, have we talked to anybody at Puppet since Rob? It's been a little while.
Didn't we talk to Steve Morawski when? No, he was at Chef. He wasn't a Puppet.
Wrong company. Even I knew that. Come on now.
We're all friends.
I don't think we have. I don't think we have. How long's Rob been doing chocolatey?
It's been.
I'm Rob's replacement at Puppet, so about that long.
Okay.
I
took his slot.
Yeah, I saw Rob a couple times at MVP Summit, Puppet Conf. But it's been a while for me. So tell us, kind of catch us up to speed for what Puppet has been doing in the PowerShell world over the past couple years or so. I think we all need to understand where you guys are there.
Wow, where should we start? We'll start with the beginning. So we used to have modules, PowerShell modules. Sorry, we have Puppet modules to manage Windows systems. So that's what I was primarily brought in to help with. Mm-hmm. We had like a PowerShell provider, so you could run PowerShell scripts on demand if you really wanted to. But then we started getting into DSC. And that's where trying to get Puppet and DSC to talk to each other much nicer. And that's where James Program came in. He's actually written 2 books on DSC. So we brought out the DSC module. So now you can write Puppet code, which now invokes DSC. So now you can use all of our Puppet modules and DSC if you need to.
So if you do that, can you get information back into Puppet about the DSC configuration as it was applied? Can you do the reporting and stuff that DSC is really not great at?
Yes and no.
Okay.
We can only surface as much information as DSC gives you.
Okay.
So, like DSC doesn't do property reporting, but Puppet does.
So how would you ideally make these things work together? Because that's kind of a big feature of the full suite of your products, right? Is that inventory is a big part of that.
Yeah, so inventory is a bit of a different thing because we use Factor, which is our inbuilt tool to grab all that information as opposed to DSC itself. Interestingly enough, I do actually have a blog article on how to move your PowerShell scripts into native Factor as well to make them run even faster.
What does that mean? I would like for you to unpack that.
Sure.
And maybe tell us a little bit about Factor for people that are not familiar with it.
Yeah, sure. So Factor's job basically is to get information about your system, and it comes back as like a hash table. So just unstructured data. Mm-hmm. So we have all of our core facts. So like what's your operating system name, what's the current uptime, what network adapters you have. But you can also extend Factor with your own custom facts. And you can do that with script files or plain text. Script files also include PowerShell. The downside is that you're calling PowerShell every single time. So you're taking that startup hit for PowerShell, particularly with PowerShell 5.1. So you're looking at about 1 to 2 seconds per fact.
Mm-hmm.
But factor is written in Ruby. So you can write custom Ruby facts, which are written in the Ruby language, which are really fast. And you can talk to WMI natively. You can do registry calls natively. You can do file system calls natively. You can do DLL calls natively.
So at some point, I mean, I feel like there was a point at which maybe when Puppet was new, that Ruby was not a great story on Windows. So, I mean, you couldn't do WMI, for example. Did Puppet have anything to do with actually maturing that? Kind of because you needed it?
I don't know how much Puppet influenced it, but we've certainly pushed the boundaries of Ruby on Windows support.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's the FFI library, which is what's used to call native Windows APIs. That's been around for years, and it's also cross-platform to Mac OS as well. DJ Berg, I can't remember his full name, perhaps Michael can do that. He actually wrote a whole heap of Win32 gems, so that's the equivalent of modules in PowerShell. You got gems in Ruby. Mm-hmm. He wrote a whole pile of them for Win32, and they're now owned by Chef. They actually look after them. So Chef's also, so we also use some of Chef's tools as well. So that's why funny. That's why I said we're all part of the same community when it comes to Windows configuration management.
Gotcha. So how much does the PowerShell Pro need to understand about Ruby to work with Puppet?
I will let Michael answer that because he's got some cool stuff in the pipeline.
Yeah, so the answer right now is complicated. So there's two sides to this question, right? And the first side is, if I just want to write configuration code, how much Ruby do I need to know? And the answer is functionally 0. You need to know the Puppet DSL, the same as you need to learn the DSC DSL if you want to write config that way, right? Mm-hmm. Which is separate from writing the equivalent to DSC resources. So in Puppet land, we call those types and providers. Types are the representation, the abstract representation of the thing you want to manage. So take, for example, a package, right? There's a bunch of things that you know to be true or want to be true about a package. You define those. You set that via the type. Providers are different implementations that allow you to manage that type. So there is one package type, but there is a provider for Ruby gems. There's a provider for NPM packages, for apt, for yum, etc. One for chocolatey. So stuff like that. So writing those requires lots of Ruby, and that has historically not been very fun. Although recently the Windows team, I think in 2017, had worked on some underlying code instantiating their own custom host and a bunch of really cool plumbing that functionally allows you to stand up a PowerShell process that you can send recurrent calls to instead of standing it up, running your call, and tearing it down for every single command, which makes it a lot easier. So now you can do things like write almost entirely small PowerShell scripts and then just have Ruby execute those and then manage the data in between. I actually wrote a blog on that recently and published it out. I'll drop that into the chat real quick. But that was step one in a lot of steps we have planned for really improving that experience. So do you mind if I take you on a journey, some of which it'll get less
Let's go.
Less firm the further down this journey we go. So the first thing is we used to have.
We haven't heard from you in a while. Are you okay with this journey?
No, I want to go on the journey.
Okay, cool.
Okay.
So right now we have 2 DSC modules, one of which, DSC Lite, is what we're telling everybody to use. It's functionally just a wrapper around invoke DSC resource. It does not help you at all get the DSC resources onto your box. It doesn't care. It says, hey, if you can get it into your box somewhere that's in the PS module path, we'll do our very best to find it and then run the resources from it, right? And so it's a sort of abstract implementation that puts a lot of the responsibility and cuts all the guardrails. We used to have a module from back in the earliest days of DSC, back when the canonical way that the DSC resources were released was through the GitHub project. That was before there was a PowerShell gallery. Tells you how long this thing's been around. And so what that used to do was it would introspect across all the types. all your DSC resources, and it would build out Puppet types and providers for each of those. So you get all the guardrails, you get IntelliSense for what are allowed values, what are the things that can work here. You get catalog compilation time error checking. So it says, hey, you specified things that don't work. This is not going to be functional. We're not even going to let you run it. DSC Lite, if you specify wrong things, we'll just kind of shrug at you and be like, I have no idea what right things are. That's on you. You're a responsible adult. Figure that out. However, that has been out of date for about a year now. The way that it was built relied on the GitHub organization, which, as you know, recently changed drastically, and a tagging convention that they haven't followed for over a year. So we haven't been able to rebuild the types. So James went off on his own one long afternoon, which probably encompassed a couple of weekends of work, and rewrote the builder not only from Ruby, which was frustrating for everybody on Windows who has to build those types, but also rewrote it into PowerShell and rewrote it in a way that we can pull down from the gallery and use that as a canonical source. So what my team is working on this quarter is finishing off that DSC rebuilder so that it'll be available as a PowerShell module on the gallery. So what you'll be able to do is run something like new Puppet new Puppetized resource, and then point it at either a module or a specific DSC resource and get a Puppetized representation of that thing that you could run. So that'll vendor the DSC library files for you into the module. It'll make the whole thing available. So all you have to do then is just ship a Puppet module and get all the kinds of black magic that you expect to work in the rest of your Puppet configuration. So that's the first thing that we plan to do. There's a couple of quality of life things we want to do that follow that. Does that part make sense, though, or do you have questions before I ramble forward?
I like it so far.
Okay, so here's where we start to get really fancy. We made a tactical error in the past when we did that DSC module. First of all, we called it Puppet Labs DSC. And since all it did really was vendor a bunch of DSC resources at different versions under our own thing, who do you think people came to when a DSC resource didn't work as expected?
Puppet?
Puppet.
Yeah, which was lots and lots of fun. People would be like, people would be like, X SQL Server's doing things I don't like. And we were like, that's highly unfortunate.
Sorry.
Right. So our plan going forward is to automate build and release of these wrapper modules around DSC, around PowerShell modules that contain DSC resources under a separate namespace. So on the Puppet Forge, it would be forge.puppet.com/DSC/ and then whatever that PowerShell module's name is, right? To be super duper clear that this is a wrapper module, and if there's a problem with calling the underlying PowerShell, that's on us. If there's a problem in the implementation of the underlying PowerShell, that's the upstream maintainer. And there's nothing we just don't have the bandwidth. I'm a team of I think 8 people for over 50 modules supported, about 150 unsupported total. When you count up supported and unsupported, and then like 20 or 30 different Ruby tools and ecosystem tools. So we have quite a lot of throughput. My team manages, I think, like 250 PRs a month right now, just coming in from the community, not counting our own work. So we just don't have the bandwidth to support every single PowerShell modules implementation on top of that, right?
So I could see that.
Our plan is to set up an auto builder, right? So that you could just add a DSC resource from the gallery. We've been discussing whether or not we want to scrape the gallery and find ones, or just have them added the first time somebody cares to have them added. So you basically be able to go to a page on the Forge and say, I want this one. And you do a search of the gallery and then click it, and then it would be added. And then every time that gets released, we'd have a nightly or a weekly runner that would check and then build those Puppet modules and release them for you, so they'll be available.
That's pretty clever.
Yeah, so that's something that we're really excited for. That's all roadmapped out. That's all in the cards right now. But one of the ways that works is by parsing the AST to look at stuff and to introspect on things. So the interesting thing is what we can do after we've done this, after we prove that this is a thing that we can do that works. What if you could just write a PowerShell script that matches a particular schema and get out a Puppet type and provider and a bolt task automatically with no extra work? You write one PowerShell script and you get all the Puppet-y stuff.
That sounds awesome.
That's kind of the direction that we're heading in right now. So that's a little bit further out. That's something that we want to work on, but we have to make sure that it's something that we think is going to be feasible, that the community will really buy into. But essentially using the Ruby PowerShell shim that the team had put together, we'd be able to basically say you conform to this little particular schema, the same way that we ask people to write code that conformed to a DSC schema, right? Exactly the same sort of thing, and then you would automatically get some really cool helpers out of it. And because of all the cool stuff that's going on in VS Code, and because Puppet has an awesome VS Code extension that Glenn's worked on along with James, we can actually also include custom PS script analyzer rules and a whole bunch of other helper stuff that'll automatically do checking and verifying for you and say, hey, you didn't conform to the schema, this thing won't work, don't even bother trying to build it. But hey, if it does, you could auto build it from VS Code, all that kind of stuff.
Very cool.
I love that stuff. It's that end-to-end integration that helps make it. I mean, I hate to have to be in the middle of writing something, have to look up syntax. You just kind of get disrupted. So, yeah, the more kind of juice you can add inside of the IDE, the better.
Yep. The thing that I'm really excited for about this approach is not only does it mean that Windows admins and Azure admins no longer have to learn Ruby, which has always been a frustrating thing, right? I think it's always been a stumbling block that some people have just kind of bounced off of and walked away from, where it says, so you could learn Puppet, you don't need to learn any Ruby. Great. Well, I want to do things that I can't do in the accepted group, and I've gotten I've got a manifest that has 15 execs where I had to manage the idempotency in each of those. And this is starting to feel really clunky. How do I write my own type and provider? Well, now you need to learn Ruby.
How about I just don't do that?
Yeah, well, and it's the only thing that you're going to use Ruby for, realistically, as a Windows admin, is going to be that Puppet type and provider. You'll never use it anywhere else. It's not like you're going to encounter it for any of your other tooling for the most part. So that was frustrating. If we can remove that stumbling block, I think we really open it up to a lot more contributions and community involvement, which I think speeds things up quite a bit. Plus, this rebuild that we're doing for DSC, because it ended up going a while through some team changes, it means it actually comes after PowerShell 7, which means it's automatically cross-plat. So you'll be able to do DSC on Linux if you want to for some reason.
Does anybody do that? Actually, so I mean that's kind of a question I would have. That'd be my first question.
Yeah, I have no idea. I haven't seen any numbers to that effect. I'd be super curious. In fairness, 7 only did just launch, so
yeah.
But we'll support it.
I wouldn't expect DSC in Puppet on Linux. That's for sure.
Mm-mm. Yeah, I'd be very surprised if somebody had already played with that.
I'm not even real clear on where DSC is right now in 7. Because I know that a lot of that stuff, they were kind of moving into Azure, and that's where the development was happening. And yeah, it's been a while since I've talked to Michael Green about that, so I'm not exactly sure what the latest is.
So yeah, I'm kind of curious to know, like, what are some of the product side changes at Puppet, and has that impacted anything else done on the Windows side?
With PowerShell 7 or?
No, I'm sorry. I meant on the Puppet software side. You guys have more than just the one, open source project.
All right. So we have Puppet Bolt. Have you heard of that before?
I haven't. I don't know if Jonathan has. So let's hear about it.
Okay. So we all love Puppet because of its declarative nature. So I want it to look like this, and then Puppet will get it to that state. Sometimes that doesn't work. Sometimes you need more of a declarative. What's the other word? Declarative and
imperative.
Imperative. That's the word. You need more imperative approach, which is I need to turn off an IIS server, then take it out of the load balancing pool, update it, then put it back in.
Okay.
You can't really model that in Puppet properly. You can do it. It looks horrible. It's unmaintainable.
And it's also backwards if that's where you came from, if that's where your brain was. Because you've been engineering your things to require a declarative model.
Yeah, we can have a chat about state machine theory later and about how they're actually the same but different.
But I see what you're saying. It's like the state, if the state isn't what you expect it to be, all of a sudden you got to break out into this other model.
Yeah. So what if you could have imperative scripts, and you could combine the two together. So you can have imperative and item and declarative models side by side. So this is what Puppet Bolt kind of fills. So Puppet Bolt is our open source task runner.
Okay.
It supports PowerShell out of the box. So you can run your PowerShell scripts across multiple nodes with managed inventory. What else does it give you? It gives you structured output, which is all great. But you can also then push that into the Puppet Master. So now you can run tasks at the Puppet Master level, and you can also do RBAC on those tasks. So you can put permissions on those tasks. So you don't have to give everyone admin rights to every single server. You can say, I only wish the IIS admin is going to do stuff on the IIS nodes, which is fantastic.
So do you have customers that are using that for more orchestration style tasks?
Yes.
Okay.
And this is where Puppet now has the concept of Bolt tasks, and we have Puppet plans. And plans is where you can combine your tasks and everything and do your orchestration.
Okay.
So you can say, do this task on this box. If it succeeds, then do this task. If it doesn't succeed, then do this task. Then you can run this piece of Puppet code, which is your declarative. Then you can run some more scripts, and you can just mix and match your orchestration to be as complex or as simple as you would like.
What's the interface look like for doing that? Is it all in YAML, or is it something that you can like drag and drop stuff, or what is it like?
Sure. So Puppet plans are currently in the Puppet language. So if you've written a Puppet manifest, it's actually written exactly the same DSL. And then the underlying task can be written in Python, Ruby, PowerShell, Bash, Command, Batch if you really want to.
Okay.
No, we do not allow talking about batch here.
It is the lowest common denominator still, unfortunately.
Every once in a while, I run into people that are writing batch scripts, and I basically tell them, hey, why don't you just open PowerShell? It's a difficult conversation.
Yeah.
So cool. All right. So Bolt sounds like that's got a pretty good PowerShell story. Now, you mentioned that it had managed inventory. Does that also use the same factor?
No. So recently, Bolt Inventory version 2, you can write your own plugins. So admittedly, they are written in Ruby. But for example, I've written a plugin that will talk to Active Directory. So you can target an Active Directory group which contains all of your computers.
Mm-hmm.
And then one of the community members came along and then actually wrote a WSUS inventory plugin. So you could run a patch task on these groups that are inside your WSUS collection. Or you could write an SCCM plugin to talk to SCCM collections or Azure inventory groups.
Okay. So how does this relate to Puppet Enterprise?
So inside of Puppet Enterprise, we have what's called a node manager. So that groups nodes into groups. So you can deploy tasks to groups however you see fit. Okay. So it's just another inventory plugin.
Okay, gotcha. So on the Puppet Enterprise side, does it have interfaces for PowerShell or an API that people are using to affect its change in it via PowerShell?
Sure. We don't have an official one. There was one written, and Michael, can you remember who it was? There's one on the PowerShell gallery. Was it Warren that did it?
I can't remember if it was Warren or Joey Piccolo. Let me check real quick.
But you know where I'm going. I mean, is it Turtles all the way down, or is it PowerShell, Ruby?
You can use PowerShell to talk to the Puppet Master via its API. I even wrote a ships provider to talk to the enterprise, so it looks like a directory.
Okay, cool.
It was both Warren and Joey.
Morgan, turn the light back on.
Morgan, turn the light back off again. Darn, he can't hear us, can he?
No.
Oh, well. So, were you going to ask anything, Jonathan?
Sorry, I got a little distracted. But one of the questions that I have, what's the story with PowerShell 7? Does that change anything from a Puppet perspective? Or, if I have Windows, or if I have PowerShell installed and deployed in my environment, everything's just going to work fine with the modules that I've wrapped and all, or eventually will. I guess that's not available yet. But how's it going to work?
Sure.
Yep.
So the short version is nothing really changes.
Okay, that's a good news.
Our PowerShell module, I actually wrote the code for it to be cross-platform with PowerShell 6.
Okay.
And I wrote that 2 years ago now. So PowerShell 7 was just, okay, we'll just test it and done.
Yep.
Perfect.
And all the modules that'll depend on the PowerShell lib, which uses the same code that Glenn wrote, just pulled it out into a Ruby gem to make it available. Anything that uses that is also cross-plat, or will also have PowerShell 7 support immediately, and is cross-plat both.
That's awesome.
So that's the silver lining. The cloud, yeah. So my bolts, the PDK and Bolt, we currently have PowerShell modules for those actually used to invoke them. Unfortunately, they install into the PowerShell 5 module location, not the PowerShell 7.
Ah, okay.
So by default, they won't pick it up. It will work, but yeah, unfortunately, we're working on that.
So what is new in PowerShell 7 that has kind of caught your interest in particular?
Ooh.
Question to anybody in the room, really.
DSC support.
That is a big one.
That's been lacking for a while.
That's probably the one that affected us personally the most. Us at Puppet the most. I will say this: the feature I am most excited for, as anybody who follows me on Twitter probably knows, is that the pipe is now a new line continuation character. And that means that your scripts can look good like they absolutely should. No more of that garbage inverted pyramid to show a pipeline nonsense. Are you familiar with what I'm talking about, or is that just gobbledygook to you?
So you don't need a grav anymore, is what you're saying?
Right. You can do some valid PowerShell code, new line, and then the first character on that line can be a pipe, and then space and continue the pipeline, and then you can new line, so you can just have a series of pipes that go straight down from that first command that show you these things are all in a pipeline together.
Okay, gotcha. That is cool.
It's so much cleaner and easier to read. You see this in a lot of functional languages. F# similarly.
Mm-hmm.
That one was big. Ternaries are big. There's a bunch of little stuff that came in that I didn't know I needed until I had them, and then I had to go back to not having them. It was sort of like the same for me as losing multi-cursor support the first time I had that, and then tried to go to an editor without it, which is why I'm a VS Code convert, because I just can't live without multi-cursor.
It is sort of like magic, isn't it?
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to secrets management.
Yeah.
So I guess that's important too.
Tell me how this one works.
So the information is a little sparse.
The Win32 crypto library that you could depend on, before we were cross-plat.
So my understanding is that this is going to provide integration with various secret management providers. So if you have like a credential store in Azure or AWS or Google, this would integrate with those. If you have something on premises, you can create your own providers to plug in, that kind of thing, is my very limited understanding at this point. I think that the one that they released, I think, works with the credential manager that's built into Windows, but my knowledge is very early at this point with that. Does anybody else have more information?
No.
Yeah, we really need
So it just reminded me, Michael, we need to put a ticket in to add secrets management with PowerShell to Puppet too, through deferred functions.
So how does
That's a good idea.
Puppet handle credentials now?
You have two ways. So you can either inject the credentials at the factor level, or Puppet has the concept of what's called deferred functions. So at the moment, how Puppet works is, so the agent will get all its facts. It sends the facts to the Puppet master. The Puppet Master gets those facts in the catalog and then generates something that has to do and sends that back to the agent. The problem is, though, is that all of that logic has to be within the master itself. So your secrets have to be present on the master, which is dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
So what you can do now is you have what's called a deferred function. So you can defer resolving those credentials until it's processed on the agent. So the master will just go, oh, I'll let the agent handle that. So now you can do your secrets management can be held at the client instead of being on the master.
But it still goes to a third party, more like a kind of a just-in-time scenario.
Yes, just in time. Yeah. That's a really good way of explaining it.
Okay. All right. That's cool. No, I like it. So anything else? There's been a couple things that were scrolling by in chat related to PowerShell 7 and other things. What were you talking about, Michael?
One of the other
conditional
language features.
operators.
Yeah. Those are magic.
So explain this, the use case for this for me, please, because I don't get it off the top of my head.
Yep. So if you do A question mark B, it'll return A unless A is null, right? And then it'll return B. So this is a great way. Like, have you ever done the check where you're like, string is null or empty, something or other? And you've got like that whole if statement. This obviates that. So you can just do these checks really easily.
Neat. Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
and the same thing, but with an assignment.
Okay. All right. It's starting to make sense to me. I did just find a blog post on Microsoft talking about the PowerShell 7 Preview 5, and you guys have probably seen these a million times. It's the fashion now for shell things is you make an animated GIF of the typing.
Right.
So I'm watching this GIF of someone build out a null conditional assignment. It's actually kind of neat. Okay, cool. So it's basically acknowledgement of these things that we do all the time, and it's kind of saving a lot of that the typing, a lot of the logic, simplifying it into that little bit.
And a lot of other languages already have this.
Yes, C# already had it for sure for forever. One of the best uses that you'll see for the null operand assignment, so question mark equals, is so if you have a variable that you want to set, but setting that value is costly in terms of execution time or processing power or whatever, you use that structure and then you set it once, and then if you ever have to like make sure that it's set, you can do that again. But if it's already been done, if it already has a value, it just won't run again. It'll just reuse that value. So you'll see that a lot for if you're instantiating something that might, or if you're doing something that might get instantiated multiple times but could be reused. It's a really, really effective way of cutting down on it, particularly for like database calls or something that has to reach outside of the system.
Okay, neat. So that'll kind of turn into some best practices.
Yeah.
Is Puppet agent based?
Yes.
Okay. So if I have PowerShell code that I want to run via Puppet, does it run in the system context on Windows machines?
By default, yes, but you can make the Puppet service run under any account you want. In fact, we've got a blog article on how to do it under group service managed accounts.
Okay. So if I have some PowerShell code and I'm going to copy some files to this box from a network share, so I have a double hop essentially, how do you handle that in Puppet? Well, I guess it's not technically a double hop, but I need to get the credentials onto that box and somehow establish the connection with those credentials.
And you want to avoid delegation because it's a pain in the butt. You could have policies that would forbid it.
Yeah. This is an interesting problem because, strictly speaking, it's not Puppet's problem.
Well, sure.
Windows created this problem.
Yeah. So the common one, actually, Michael, do you want to take this one, or want me to keep on going? Because I've talked.
You can keep going. I talked for a long time earlier.
Yourself a further hole here.
Well, if
I'm curious to see if your solution is the same as mine.
Sure. I mean, the most common problem we see there is installing software packages. So how do you get the packages onto the box before you run the install?
Okay.
People normally have them on an SMB share, a Windows share somewhere. One of the quickest and easiest ways, particularly for an Active Directory environment, is the computer has a security principal. So you can just grant that computer object access to that share if you want to.
Right. That makes sense.
But it needs to be solved within the Windows security ecosystem that is particular to you.
Now, if I configure Puppet such that my code runs as a specific user, does that user have to be an administrator on the box that the code executes on in order to make a network call, for example?
It needs to have the rights to make the changes that you want it to make. By default, administrator will probably be the best person. I have seen some people attempt to lock it down. It went okay until they decided to manage something else, and they have to add another permission, then add another permission, and another permission.
Sure.
And by then you don't have to just make them admins.
And then what was your solution for that, Michael? Was it the same thing, or you had something else?
Well, there's two ways. The first is to change your setup so that you don't need to do authentication like that, right? Which is an answer that a lot of people will come across. So there's a file resource in Puppet that can hit all kinds of different endpoints and then manage them that way to copy files to the local system. So you could use any of the ways that works there. If you don't want to go through the whole permissions rigmarole, just change it up a little bit. But the actual answer, in my opinion, if you're doing it to install third-party software, is just to use Chocolatey.
Oh, okay, sure.
It's the most common thing that we come across, and people will be like, I'm having problems installing third-party software. It's like, there's a much less painful way than manually scripting all of that yourself and then trying to run it through config. I promise.
Makes sense.
And this is really the reason why Chocolatey exists. I mean, there was a gap, and that was kind of the whole point.
Yeah, 100%. Because if you're not going to use Chocolatey, then you're going to be on the hook for writing your own version comparisons for each of those different types of software, depending on how they get their version, right? Whatever that's canonical for that thing. You're also going to have to do the installs and whatever those switches are and all that stuff. And at that point, you're re-implementing Chocolatey, which doesn't sound like a good use of your team's time to me.
Agreed.
And unsurprisingly, Puppet does have first-class support for Chocolatey.
That's good news.
Yes, and I wonder who wrote that.
Yes.
That worked out well.
And who was the poor schmuck that had to fix it when Rob made mistakes?
Oh.
Hi, Rob. Love you.
Actually, speaking of that module, Nick Maludi is working on a Bolt task for Chocolatey. We're going to be partnering up a little bit to do some work on there so that we can get pester tests and acceptance tests and stuff in place for that. But otherwise, I mean, the changes looked good, and I was reviewing that earlier this week, actually.
So Microsoft has a lot of good support for managing Windows machines. Your customers that are using Puppet to do configuration management and things on Windows, what problems are they using Puppet to solve that makes them prefer Puppet over other tools?
Yeah, it depends on where people are coming from, because we get customers that say mainly a Linux and they're just bringing in some Windows nodes.
Oh, okay.
So
sure, that makes sense.
Coming from a space that they already know. Patch management is always a fun thing that people try to do in Puppet.
Okay.
Tony Green, who's recently came onto Puppet, actually has an entire module and everything about how to do patching with Puppet. Package management in SCCM. I'm not sure if anybody's done SCCM package management before. It's not fun.
Yes.
Chocolatey plus.
That used to be your job, Jonathan.
Yeah. SCCM. Chocolatey plus Puppet is a really good solution. So that's a really good way to do those kinds of things.
A whole lot less overhead. A whole lot less infrastructure required.
Yeah. So because we've got so many modules on the Forge, both supported and unsupported, there's just so many different ways that we see customers using Puppet to solve their problems. Even simple things just like doing inventory management.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Just using Factor and putting Puppet into a no-op mode. So you can have the agent just sitting there running day in, day out in no-op, just auditing all of the changes that it would do. I mean, that's a great auditing experience,
Right.
as well.
Yeah, that makes sense.
That's actually how I advise people to get started with config management to begin with, is to either write, back before when the project was still active, posh spec tests, right? Or configs, and then run those in no-op. So the question I always ask people when we start talking about config management is, tell me 3 things you know to be true about every server in your environment, and then let's go prove that those things aren't true. Right? Because there's not even 2 things that you know to be true about everything in your environment for the most part. I bet there's an exception.
Sure, that makes sense.
And so if you start by auditing, you can very quickly, like, what are the things you care most about, like the 5 most critical things, run it in no-op and audit your stuff, and just verify it, and see where you're at. And then you can use that to kind of like have the discussion around, well, okay, we've extended from these 5 things to these 7 things. Well, we had that one security incident, so we know that this thing's now really important to us. And you just slowly build out. What I see a lot of people try to do is, I have to get all of my config 100% under management right now, which is an impossible task. You can't. You probably can't get 100% of your config under management to begin with. You'll get 90-something percent. And then after that, you're just kind of, it goes back to that marginal returns, right? So you get the things that count most first, and then add things as you're able to. And one of the things that I've found with people, and I don't know, Glenn, if you found the same thing, is that as you do this, it's kind of that go slow to go smooth to go fast, right? At first, getting everything under config instead of making a change to your server, it feels really slow. It feels awful to have to like put in a PR and wait for it to go through, and then it gets merged, and then your changes propagate. Great. Fine. I could have done that in 30 seconds if I just logged in, opened it up, and changed it, which is fast once, but then something goes wrong with that change, and all of a sudden you have to audit how it happened or where it came from, right? Why it was done. This brings all that knowledge back together and is super helpful in that way. And I find that people are doing config managements for the same reasons they were doing it 7 or 8 years ago, right, when they first got started. Those same reasons have remained super compelling. And I don't think anybody stopped running infrastructure in the meantime, as far as I know. So,
well, one thing that has changed that I'd kind of like to get your opinions on is the prevalence of CI/CD and kind of a little bit tighter of linkages in a lot of companies between the development and the operations. So, has that turned into any differences in how Puppet does things, or how you see the world, or how customers see Puppet?
That's interesting, because I first got introduced to Puppet and config management via CI/CD. I had a bunch of Team City agents I needed to deploy, and I wanted them to be all the same all the time. And these damn devs kept coming on and installing their own stuff. So I had my Puppet agent come along and just get rid of it.
Automate removing their... So, but what if are developers taking to building out the Puppet artifacts in order to do the deployment?
I am not seeing I'm not seeing as many people do that, but I don't see as many customers as I would like. So I would hope that we have that cross-pollination now. However, we do have a product that comes as part of Puppet Enterprise now called Continuous Delivery for PE. Mm-hmm. So you can actually have your control, it's called your control repository, controls all of your Puppet configuration. That is now CI/CD-able, so you can put up a pull request. It will then compile this new configuration, tell you what nodes it's going to modify, which things it's going to change before you even apply it. This is fantastic. It's no longer, I put up a pull request, merge it, wait 5 minutes for my test server to apply those changes. Oops, I forgot a semicolon. Go back, do a commit, round and round and round we go. Now you can do that before you even apply the changes, and you can comment on them and do things like that.
So does this have anything to do with Project Nebula?
No.
Okay, that's different.
Correct.
So tell us about Nebula. Yes, I'm on your website and I'm scrolling and clicking around.
Don't do that. That is, I'm gonna chuck Michael on the bus for that one. Do you know what it is, Michael?
Link in the video. So Nebula's gone through a couple iterations, which I'm going to say that I tenuously grasp as being kind of trying to rethink how we're going to approach building blocks in the cloud, right? And so what we've settled on is this relay product, which I haven't been involved with or looked at deeply, so I can't answer anything really beyond what's on that page. But it basically amounts to building workflows off of events that manage cloud infrastructure. So rather than having a historical problem back when both Chef and Puppet tried to do provisioning long ago in the distant past, because I was using Chef provisioning at the time, was that you still needed a node to apply a config for spinning up your external infrastructure on, which is a weird concept. So what a lot of people do is they would have their provision node, and that provision node's config would include all of the infrastructure you wanted to spin up in Azure or in AWS or Google. And so it was weird that these things were like a configuration item attached to this particular node. So this instead says, let's rethink it kind of in a similar way to Terraform rethinking how you compile infrastructure and do it from an event-based look, right? So a good example of the sort of thing that this wants to enable is you log into ServiceNow, you get a new VM request, you approve that new VM request, and that kicks off an event that then stands it up in the appropriate Azure resource group, builds up the stuff that it needs, assigns it to the right people, gives it the right groups. All of that stuff happens off the back end. And then you get an event alert that says, hey, all your things are configured and happy now. Rather than you writing individual scripts for all that, you compose a bunch of event answers, if that makes sense. That's my understanding of it right now.
Okay, gotcha. So to keep on in this trend, we're on trawling the Puppet website. What is Wash?
I'm going to let Glenn handle that one since he kicked it to me.
So Wash is the wide area shell. It was to make accessing multiple clouds like a POSIX shell, not supported on Windows. But basically think PowerShell providers, but for any cloud provider.
Okay. So did they didn't get the memo about PowerShell? I mean, come on.
I gave them the memo. I gave them the Monad manifesto as well.
Oh, really? How did that,
Yes.
Have we seen any impact from that? Because I'm looking at this introducing Wash thing, and I'm thinking, okay, this was solved by PowerShell, 11 years ago.
Yes, it was. And wasn't there some guy that did something about PowerShell provider talk at PowerShell Summit last year? So I told them all about it. They are aware.
Okay.
Our
we need
CTO,
not.
Our CTO loved the manifesto and was really, it actually solidified a lot of his ideas.
Had Deepak not seen it before?
You may not have seen it or may not remember it. It was a while ago.
Okay. All right. I know Deepak. Do I need to get him on the phone? I mean, do we need to have a conversation about this?
If you can get him, go for it.
Okay. We talk once a year, and he comes to my user conference. So Deepak has been on my DevOps panel at the Splunk user conference every year for the past few years. So it's not like I know him well, but I do talk to him once a year around the same time of the year. So it's kind of funny. We have this very, very odd relationship. It's like I talked to him, for 30 minutes, and he said, oh yeah, sure. Oh yeah, I'm in. And then 3 months pass, and then I see him, and we have a great time, and then I don't talk to him again, for another 6 months or whatever. But so I'm not saying that I have any juice with Deepak at all whatsoever.
Say if you
It's
do,
a long way to say that. But
Yeah.
I do have his phone number. I mean, I'll read it out online, and then we can just kind of see what happens. I mean, just I have no control over that. I'm kidding. Deepak, your phone is fine. However, his what is his Twitter handle? I had it right over here. Hold on. There he is. Grim Radical. Yeah. So just saying, check out Watch.
He's
revisit
currently
that.
working on some really cool stuff, which I can't talk about.
I'm sure he is.
Yep.
All right, cool. So what else? Is there anything else that we haven't talked about? that is interesting to you guys that the listeners of the podcast would also be interested in?
Well, we talked briefly about Puppet bolts. So the WSUS client module, which is used to manage your WSUS client, has some tasks in there. I did a 2-part blog on how I wrote that, which also includes how to write pester tests for your bolt tasks that are written in PowerShell.
Very cool.
Because that does require a little bit of rethinking about how you're writing your scripts.
Where can people find your blog?
I will get you the links, but that is on the Puppet website, on the Puppet blog section. Just look for my name.
Oh, okay.
Well, to be honest, you can probably just Google Glenn Sarti, WSUS client, blog, Puppet. You probably
I already dropped him in chat.
Sweet, thanks.
No problem.
They didn't show up for me, which was weird.
In the YouTube chat?
YouTube
yeah, usually in YouTube.
Thing?
Yeah, usually it filters, but it asks me to approve it, and I just approve the links. But
if you click on live chat, no, I don't see it. Weird. Oh well, drop it to us in Slack, and we'll make sure to get somewhere.
Yeah, disappointed we couldn't get to PowerShell Summit this year.
Yeah, that kind of knew it was happening, but that did not make my day to get that announcement.
So when now of course I'm way out of the loop, guys. What were the dates of the summit?
Late April.
Oh well. These are strange times that we live in.
Yes, I was looking forward to doing the third pester talk. It was going to be fun.
Yeah, I struggled with my feelings over it being canceled because I had to cancel on account of having a baby due at the end of mid to late May, and I realized perhaps skipping out of town 2 or 3 weeks before the due date was a poor idea.
Yeah, not a good plan.
Yeah, congratulations / wise choice there.
So I canceled because I realized I just wasn't going to have, especially with all the other stuff that we had going on, I wasn't going to have the bandwidth to write the talk that I wanted to. And so then when they canceled, it's like, well, cool. I don't feel so bad about not being there to give my talk. I mean, it sucks for everybody else, but since I couldn't go, it's only fair that none of you can go.
Oh, well, thanks for that.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I had to cancel on an event recently, and it was embarrassing, and I have no problem sharing it with the whole world because it's kind of funny. Has nothing to do with PowerShell, but just bear with me. So I don't know if you guys are gamers. I know some of you are, but I have a MacBook, and the horsepower's there, but obviously the compatibility with a lot of the games is not. So I boot camp, boot into Windows to do some gaming now and then, but I didn't want to give all my hard drive to Windows for that. I didn't leave enough space. I had like 50 gigs, so I only had like 10, 15 gig space free, which is not a whole lot these days at all. AAA titles, you just forget it. So I have this removable drive, and I mounted a USB-C drive, and it's supposed to be really fast. I've got an SSD in there, no problems, and I can't get it to show up in Windows. And I'm troubleshooting that, and I'm getting frustrated, and I leave it alone. And then this whole, virus thing hits, and everybody's, we're all working from home, and we're all, just kind of changing patterns, and we're home a lot more. And I go downstairs to try and get that drive working again, and I plug it up, and I hear the Windows USB sound, and it's detected. Yes, it's there. Great, cool. And I go format the partition and start moving my Steam library over, and then I think I downloaded Borderlands 3 and got it installed. I hadn't played it yet, and then I go, I turn it in for the night. I get up in the morning, and I go to boot my Mac up into Windows. It was still in Windows. I go to reboot it to Mac, and it goes back into Windows. And then I try to force it to look at the bootloader to see if my partition's there. Just Windows. I had deleted my Mac OS partition.
Nice.
Womp womp.
Yeah. So Monday morning, I had to reload my OS. So that was nice. But on a Mac, like chocolatey on Windows,
yeah, it's easy.
You have Homebrew. You can get a lot of your stuff done like that. Anyway, that's my That's my interesting story that has nothing to do with anything. I hope you appreciated it. So, hey guys, in kind of closing, what would you like to say? Where to send people, how to reach out, give you feedback, stuff like that.
So I'm on Twitter, so really original @GlennSarti. So you can send stuff there. We also have the Puppet Community Slack, which I don't have the links for, but you should just be able to query for that. I'll get you the links for the show notes. So most of us hang out in there, so you can have any Windows questions. Better yet, we've got lots of Windows customers that hang out in there. Even I think Derek Robinson from Walmart actually hangs out there every now and then. So you can see what Walmart's doing with Windows and Puppet. So that's probably 2 good places if you want to find me.
Yep.
Awesome.
I'm always on Twitter. I don't really talk tech anymore, as anybody who's accidentally followed me for PowerShell will attest. It's almost entirely game development, which is the thing I do on the side. However, I'm in Slack. My team has a blog that I dropped the links for. We put those out. We put out an update every Friday for what we're working on, where we're at. And we also put out other blog posts. We kind of go along. That's where the Ruby PowerShell stuff landed. And then I think people may not know that you can still buy copies of the second volume of the PSConf book. And those will continue to benefit on-ramp folks for next year, since this year was canceled.
Okay.
Speaking of the summit. So
Nice.
we'll be able to get even more people through that scholarship program next year. And Mark is starting up Volume 3, which I won't be involved with. But I do want to give a shout out to Mark Krause and to Paula Kingsley and to everybody who came through to help out, especially Joel Sallow, Adil. There are a couple other people whose names I'm forgetting because I didn't think ahead to write everybody down. But we got a huge amount of help from the author team to kind of pull it over the line earlier this year.
That's really awesome. And one of the cool things about just the list of names that you said, and Jonathan and I have been in this community for a long time, and I recognize a lot of those names. So it's just kind of neat that people have been contributing for it's something that people care about this long.
And with the Comp 3 book, which I think they are looking for people right now, is that right? Or about to?
That is correct.
They are planning to have a wider, and with the version 2 book and with the version 3 book, they're going to have a wider breadth of authors. So whereas the initial book was kind of, people were MVPs and those types of people, the scope of the other 2 books is much more open to, anybody from the PowerShell community who has a good idea and wants to write a chapter. So it's very cool.
Yeah, we did a little bit of targeted requesting for version 2. We sought out people who we hadn't seen at the summit or we hadn't seen popping up for other conferences and book deals and stuff. And we wanted to make sure that they had a chance to add their voice because the community is so huge and there are so many people inside of the PowerShell community who are doing amazing work. They're running blogs and they're sharing stuff on Twitter and they're showing up for tweet chats and they're in Slack. And there's all these people all over the place that a lot of people don't know. And so we wanted to make sure that a lot of those names got to pop up too. I think it's really important that as the group of us who were in that first book move forward, we're putting down ladders to invite everybody else up instead of pulling them up behind us.
That's awesome.
I like that sentiment. That is pretty cool.
How many
Jonathan?
How many authors did you have for version 2? It was about 30 odd?
I think the end chapter count ended up being 41. There were somewhere northwards of 60 people who submitted chapter stuff. We had to be a little bit more ruthless towards the end about getting it over the line. So I think some of those chapters will probably show up in volume 3. And I think you'll probably see even more chapters. The other thing is that the process between books has radically shifted each time and is getting smoother and smoother as we add more automated tools. This time around, we had some grammar checking and some syntax checking. The thing where I think I failed the most as project lead was not getting enough editors We had some primary editors, but we should have been recruiting secondary editors early in the process instead of waiting towards the end when it was, hey, can you edit 30 chapters in 2 weeks? And the answer is no.
Yeah, no. That was all volunteer, I assume?
Yep. Everybody involved was a volunteer. Yep. It was rough.
No, nobody's going to edit 30 chapters in a couple weeks for free.
Joel certainly tried.
I'm sure the effort was there, but that is a lot of work right there.
Yeah. So that'll get better. I think there's been a bunch of talks about how to smooth that out and improve it. And I think it's one of the things that I was really excited for overall was how much this community has kind of rallied around bringing people in and making sure that opportunities are available that will change the demographic for our niche of the industry over time and make it available even if you don't have the access like I did. Like the way that I got into PowerShell functionally was, I had a lot of safety net around that I could just spend an extra 4 hours, 5 hours a night honing my skills until I was employable. That's not available to everybody. Sure. So that on-ramp gives people, if you're changing careers, if you're a single parent, if you're disabled, if you've got any other problems, you're poor and you work 3 jobs, it's kind of hard to find time to, practice coding in between all that. So giving people real skills and networking fast to get them running, I think is critically important. Kind of shortcut all of the rigmarole around getting into the industry.
So it's particularly unfortunate for the people in the on-ramp program that the summit was canceled.
Yeah, I think that's one of the larger impacts. As much as I hate not being there, I think it's worse that it delays this for a lot of people. I'm curious to see what DevOps Collective is doing around that.
Yeah, I am too. I haven't heard yet. I'm sure they will come up with a good solution.
Yeah, almost definitely.
Great people working over there.
Yep. And I think almost all of their money year over year as a foundation is tied up in the events and in training courses and stuff. All the donations that they do.
Yeah, I really hope they didn't lose a bunch of money.
They probably did, unfortunately.
Yeah, and
hopefully we can help them recover.
Reservations that couldn't be unwound.
Right.
Yep.
Oh, well.
Well, let me go ahead and ask both of you our special question that we ask our first-time guests when we remember. So I will start with... Who should I start with? I'll start with Michael. Michael, if you could be a superhero or have a superpower, what would you choose and why?
So I talk about this all the time with my workout buddy whenever we're walking after lifting. So my answer changes based on the week.
Okay.
So my answer this week, I would be tempted to go with perfect health.
Okay.
Not necessarily regeneration or anything like that, just that I stay functionally at tip-top perfect health until one day I collapse and die out of the blue.
That would be great.
It's not real good for fighting crime, but it would make life a lot better.
Oh, sure.
I'd be very tempted. I've also watched too many superhero movies and their lives are all terrible. I don't think I'm not necessarily superhero material.
Yeah, you lose everybody who's close to you. It's bad things happen.
You suffer forever. Like
they got
every
a lot
time
of drama,
you make,
don't they?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, every time you make personal progress, like you've grown as a person, something else awful has to happen to you to set you back. Like there's no you don't get happy endings. Your life is just a treadmill of terror. So hard pass for me, thanks.
So Glenn, what would you say?
Rather partial teleportation. So perhaps a bit of a night crawler, but perhaps without the blue skin that goes along with it.
Oh,
Thank you. I'm a big Nightcrawler fan. I appreciate that. And it's funny because I was actually, Jonathan, I was going to ask you because maybe we should kind of revisit this because it's been a long time since we talked about this topic at any length.
So we actually did recently.
We did?
We did this year.
Shoot.
So my latest answer is, my original answer was Hiro Nakamura from the show Heroes. And I still think that is probably the power that I will would be amazing to have. But I really like the Flash TV show, and I really like the stuff that they've been doing with his power. So I think that would be really cool.
All right. I do remember now that you mention it. Yeah. What did I say then? Because
I think you said you still would pick Nightcrawler.
Still with the Nightcrawler. Yeah, I love teleportation. I don't know. It's just it's been a fascination for a long time. Whenever I talk to kids sometimes, the younger two that are 8 and 11, about, what do you want to be when you grow up? And the answers change all the time. But sometimes they're like, oh yeah, I want to build a teleportation machine. I'm like, yes, that's a great idea. Please go do that.
However, did you ever get around to reading Timeline? Have you ever read that by Michael Crichton?
I've read everything by him just about, but I don't remember that one specifically. So
the plot, one of the major plot points in Timeline is you can only teleport so many times before the little errors in your teleportation add up, and then your veins and bones don't align, and you start to die very horribly. Oof. So, teleportation is great. To be fair, Nightcrawler is also my best friend's pick.
You have a good friend there. Yeah. So published in '99. Yeah, I missed that one somehow. Huh. Yeah, well,
it's a good book. There was a movie about it with what's his face, Leonidas, before he got famous, Gerard Butler. He actually played second fiddle to Fast and the Furious guy, whose name also escapes me. I'm bad with names today.
I go through like little mini phases where I'm bad with names. I don't know what the deal is.
Anyway, the cast is all great, so you should check it out.
Sort of, kind of, slightly related. Did you see the movie Jump?
No.
I don't think so.
If that's the movie that I think it is, which I should probably verify. No, never mind. Maybe the wrong movie. I'm going to have to look up the name of the movie. There's a book about teleportation. They might have changed the name of the movie. I'll have to look it up. But it talks about some of the complexities that go along with it. Similar to what you were talking about with Timeline.
Jumper.
Maybe it's Jumper. Maybe that's it.
With Hayden Christensen and Samuel L. Jackson?
Yeah, that's the movie version. The book, well, of course, yeah, the book's always better or whatever. But I did really enjoy the book. It had a sequel. But yeah, the movie's not bad. But yeah, Jumper is the name that I was looking for. Yeah, so cool. We have 2 book recommendations for you, everyone. And I'm going to go check out Timeline and add that to my queue for sure.
Yeah, I'm unfortunately made of book recommendations, so
that's not a bad thing.
No, it's fair.
Not a bad thing.
Anyway, cool. And we could talk, maybe next episode, Jonathan, we talk about books.
I haven't been reading as much lately. I need to fix that.
Until I've been very recently, past few weeks, getting back into reading. So I was actually checked out for quite a while. So I felt bad about it. So I started, picking some John Scalzi, I think the name is.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
He's got some neat stuff that I'm reading. So
I've read some of Don Jones' fiction books. I read Alabaster and Onyx, which I really liked. And I started The Nether today, I think. But
I read Alabaster. I think I need to catch up on the others.
Yeah, Onyx is out now, the second book.
Okay, cool. Awesome. Well, Michael, Glenn, really glad that you guys came by and spent some time with us. It was a really interesting conversation. So thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, great
listener, first time caller.
Thanks for the chat room. You guys kind of brought the puppet crew along with you, which is pretty neat.
We do travel in packs, yes.
Well, I think half of us met at the summit, so.
Oh, really? Yes. That's funny.
Yeah. That's how Glenn recruited me and Bill.
Very good. Cool. Well, thank you, everybody. And yeah, now they're talking about Jumper in the chat. So.
Time to call it quits.
Yeah.
All right.
All right.
Good night, everybody. Thanks.